Hi, and welcome. In this video, we're going to look at biblical leadership, projects 12 through 14. And to cover this material, we're going to look at four main things. First, we're going to look at the purpose, then we're going to look at the description, then we'll actually look at the project steps, and finally, we'll end our time by looking at how this applies to what you do on the field. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you, and we'll look at these elements in more detail. So let's begin by looking at the area of biblical leadership, which we call S-3 leadership, for servant, steward, shepherd leadership. Now, in this series of projects, we'll be doing three main things. First, we'll be making a model. Second, from that model, we'll be making a training packet. And then third, from the model, we'll also be creating an assessment tool. These all come from character outcome number 3, competencies number 7 through 9. So let me begin by describing the purpose of this series of projects, or this competency. The project will help you and those that you lead to develop the heart attitude of Jesus as a servant, shepherd, and steward leader. That will be reflected then in how you lead. A description of the project will be this. You'll be creating a model of a biblical servant, shepherd, steward, leader for your context that will then be applied actually in your context also. Next, you will then create from that model a training packet, and that training packet will be used to train those leaders underneath your care. And then finally, you'll create an assessment tool, and that assessment tool will be used for both you and for those you lead. Now, to look at the project steps, we'll go ahead and look at the next slide. This slide will give you an overview of how to think about character trait number 3, or competencies 12 through 14. And so you can see that at the heart of this project or series of projects is creating a model. And from that model, you will then create a training packet. Now that training packet will be used in your context for those that you lead. And that's the training others section. And the expectation is that once they understand the nature of this model, they then can pass that model on to others that they lead. Then the next thing you'll see is not only is that model used to create a training packet, but it's also used to create an assessment tool. And in that assessment, you'll be assessing both yourself and those you lead. So as you can see, the biblical model that you create is critical. So let's turn our attention now to how to actually come up with that biblical model. And as you can see, the goal here, number 1, is to make a biblical leadership model. And in order to do that, we'll apply the 8-step process and to study in depth the scriptures, both the Old and the New Testament, number 3. And you'll do that, hopefully, number 4, as a cohort, because then you can share the load. And what you can do is you can divide some up. Half the group can take the Old Testament, half can take the New Testament. You can use steward, shepherd, servant leadership as your initial guidelines or tracks to run on, but you may find that you have other categories, which is fine, and add those. Once you've come up with your data as a cohort, you'll want to there share your findings with each other, since you'll have done different sections from each other. Once you have those sections, then you'll want to work on a model. You can do that as a cohort, or you can do that individually, but you're going to want to come up with a biblical leadership model. And this biblical leadership model then becomes the core element as you look at the next step, which is to actually then create a training packet. As you can see, it begins with your biblical model. And from that biblical model, you'll create a training packet. The purpose of this training packet is for you to train those people that are underneath your leadership, so that they too can understand what it looks like to be a biblical leader, to be a biblical servant, shepherd, steward, leader, as they lead others, so they can lead them like Christ leads. Once they understand that model, and by the way, this model that we're using is a supplement to the leadership model that we use, the leadership framework that we use in Crew. It's not in place of it, but it's a supplement too, and it shows you what the heart of a leader should be like. And so once they have been trained in the biblical model, they then can train those underneath them. And so you can see that this model will allow us to reach greater scope or to reach more people by having a larger leadership base. Now, once we have the training packet in order, then what we can do is we can also make an assessment tool, because that assessment tool will also be part of the training packet. And again, as you can see, the model is based on, the model then becomes the basis for the assessment tool. And when you create this assessment tool, what you're trying to do is twofold thing. First, you're trying to assess your own leadership style. Do you lead like Christ? Are you leading as a shepherd, steward, servant leader? And then you want to also assess those underneath you. Are they also doing the same? Because as we learn to lead like Christ, we will also see that those that follow us will do the same. And this is critical because it's a superior style of leadership, but also so that people can see Christ in us, which is tied to the gospel. And so now we've looked at the model and we've looked at how to do a training packet and an assessment tool. And so next thing we want to do is we want to think about the field application. And the field application has three aspects, as you can imagine. From the model, you're going to first you're going to create a model, and that model will then give you a biblical basis for understanding leadership throughout the scriptures from the Old and the New Testament that can then be applied to the leadership framework in your own context. The second thing it's going to align your leaders through the training packet by them having a common leadership model by which to go from. They will then learn and see what biblical leadership is like because you're modeling it, but also because you have a biblical model by which they can follow. Finally, the last thing in the field that this is going to do is it's going to sharpen both you and those that you lead to be more like Christ in their leadership, which then will allow them to be more effective in caring for and leading others. And so that is the heart of this series of projects, or this character outcome, which is create a model. From the model, you'll create both a training packet and an assessment tool, all for the purpose of having a more effective ministry, increasing your leadership base so that you can lead even more people, and so that more and more people can come to know Christ. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you.